go.
Hey YouTube, welcome back to Locked In Anglers. We've got an awesome video for you guys today where we break down our favorite summer technique, the tube. The tube just is an absolute staple in our arsenal. We love throwing it in the summer. It catches big smallmouth, big largemouth, and just puts a ton of good fish in our live well on tournament day. If you guys like this video and like this type of educational content, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and we're gonna keep bringing you more and more of it every week. So let's get into the goods here. So in this video, we're going to break down what type of baits we're using, what type of heads we're using, and where we throw it to target the biggest fish that we possibly can on tournament day. So for the baits, there's a handful of different tubes that we use, and it really depends on what type of species we're targeting and what we're trying to do with the bait. So the first one, as you can see by this enormous bulk package, this is a Dry Creek tube, and this is a whole heck of a lot of them. We run the Dry Creek tube in the Crazy Eddie color and in the green pumpkin red color pretty exclusively for a large portion of the year when we're targeting smallmouth. We like to go for that 4-inch size tube. It's called the Big Dog tube, and it just elicits a little bit bigger of a bite. It has a big profile, but it has a nice slender shape to the tube, so it actually looks a lot like a bait fish as well as a crawfish, and we can use it in a pretty dynamic fashion because of that. So for those tubes, we're looking pretty exclusively at using the darter head style. So we run a Gamakatsu darter head, usually a 1/4 to 3/8 ounce size, just depends on how much wind there is and how deep we're fishing. And we thread that in there. We cut a little section out of the middle of it so we can thread the hook through. And that's what we run for most of our smallmouth fishing, always running it on 10 to 12 pound Sunline fluorocarbon. And it's just a great bait to get those fish out of the rocks and out of that rock to grass transition this time of year. Handful of other ones that we definitely throw in the mix. Really like just the old-fashioned Strike King coffee tube. Roadkill is a great color, watermelon red, green pumpkin black flake. All those ones are really, really good colors. But then one that really has caught us by surprise in the last couple of years is the Big Bites 3.5-inch tour tube. This thing flat out gets bit. It's covered in salt. It works really well with a lot of different type of tube heads, including some of our favorites, the Bite Me tube heads. As you can see, it's just like your normal vertical-eyed tube head, but it has an additional compartment in the back, and that's because you can buy these with a rattle. And in the summer, when those fish are super aggressive early in the morning, throwing a tube with a rattle can be a huge difference maker and put a bunch more fish in the boat, because you can just let that thing twirl on down and just shake it on the rocks, and it just gets a ton of bites. It sounds like a crawfish moving along down there, and it's just a great way to catch them in the low light condition and in the middle of the day when there's a lot of activity going on in the water. One of the other ones we like to use a lot, and this is really where we kind of start trending into that largemouth territory. If we're looking to flip or to fish around emergent grass or grass that's sitting on the surface, we really like the Yum Vibra King tube. We can rig this with a Texas rig it weedless. It's got a really thick head and then a hollow body, so you can run that like a Texas rig hook or a worm hook or a flipping hook right through it and just get a really weedless presentation, but have all the horsepower to be able to get those fish back out of the grass. And this is the last one's one of our favorites. It's the Mega Tube. It's a 6-inch tube. It's not the true Mega Tube. We do throw like a 7 and 8-inch tube for bedfish, a bright white one. But this is really your true summer tube for big fish. It's the Venom Lure 6-inch tube. It's called the Mega Monster. It's a fantastic tube for just getting down there and creating a ton of commotion, blasting through grass, blasting through rock, and just really getting a really large presentation in front of those really big females that have just come out and started feeding up for the summer. Really good, a couple really good heads that you can use for that. You can use the Venom actually has their own tube head. That's a really good one. Or you can pair it with one of the heavier long shanked Bite Me, like 3/4 ounce tube heads. This is a shorter shank one, but they make a longer shank one as well, and it pairs really well with that bigger tube profile, and that bait comes crashing down with that 3/4 ounce size. But that kind of opens us up to the next part of the equation with how we fish a tube, and it kind of ties into how we actually set up and run our tubes. But more often than not, we're running it with a tube head, because we're looking to get that spiraling tube fall that the tubes are known for, and you can only really get that with a darter head or with your normal like open face tube jig like this, and the bait will just spin down all the way to the bottom, hit the bottom, and you're working it back. You're popping it up, letting it spin back down, dragging it on the bottom, just trying to figure out what the fish are trying to do and what type of presentation they're trying to key in on that day. But just as we're getting into this time of year where the grass is at its maximum height, maybe starting to die down a little bit, we start getting into a bite that we absolutely love, and it's cracking a tube. And it's not just the old Mark Zona hit the tube a little bit on slack line. We crack the tube. Basically, the only way to get that true grass clearing tube smack for us is we're using a pretty stout rod. We're getting that tube right up in the grass, and we're basically just punching the bottom of our rod to launch that bait up on slack line as hard as possible to try to elicit that reaction strike for those fish that are sitting on the edge of the grass or suspended up above the grass, to have that bait come flying out at Mach 10 and just be right in their face. It can be an awesome way to get super electric bites and catch some of the bigger fish that you're going to ever catch on a tube. I think most of our big fish have come on that actual technique. For the fish that we're catching on tubes in the summer, almost all of our big ones are coming from the cracking a tube method. And with cracking a tube, there's a couple different methodologies we like to play. If we're around some deeper grass in that about 14 to, probably like that 10 to 14 foot range, we're going straight to the Bite Me 3/4 ounce tube head. And because it's got that thicker profile, we can't really run the dry creek tubes that we normally like, and that's where we start trending towards the big bite baits, or the coffee tube. It has that larger sized that larger sized tube head that just really fits that tube, that just 3/4 ounce tube head a lot better than the slightly skinnier dry creek tubes. As you can see, that marries up really well, and it makes for a really good presentation when you're cracking that tube in and around the grass. And and if they're not on that true grass, that true grass to rock transition line, the other way you can catch them is just on the fall with a tube. It works a lot like a Senko does. It has a really, really enticing fall, and that's where we start to go towards that darter head, or that Gamakatsu darter head is the one that we use in particular. And if we can get away with it, we're going to go as light as possible. We love to throw the 1/4 ounce tube head. We actually caught one of our big fish on that in the Moses Lake tournament we won a couple weeks ago, because that tube, when it's fallen 10 feet down with a 1/4 ounce tube, with a 1/4 ounce tube head, it's just going to do a super wide concentric circle all the way down, and it's a really tantalizing option for especially for smallmouth who are overly aggressive. But it can help pull largemouth for pretty large ways, just because it has a lot of disturbance in the water as it's making those wide arcs and circles. So I know we touched on it a little bit, but where we're really throwing a tube, where a tube really cuts its teeth, is around rock and around those rock to grass transitions. Sometimes sand to grass transitions can be good if there's a large bait fish or crawfish population, but those areas where rock intersects grass, or there's scattered rock within grass, a tube can be a dynamite way to catch those fish that are in anywhere from 0 to 4 feet with a really light tube head, all the way out to 12, 14 feet if you're out there cracking the heavy lead and hitting that tube as hard as you can to break it through that grass. Both of them are awesome options and are always on our deck in summer tournaments, and they always equate to fish for us on tournament day. So one of the tips that we found that works really well, especially as we go into tournaments, is we like to pre-rig our tubes. So we use a lot of scent with our tubes. It's one of the few baits that we actually infuse with scent. We actually, instead of doing the normal like spit on the tube head and slide the tube in, we actually use Mega Strike as the lubricant, and it allows just a ton of salt and just crawfish flavor to just cover the bait. And then we like to let it soak and sit with the tube head already connected in Ziploc bags prior to the tournament. Not only does it get a lot more of the, well, just kind of marinates in the sauce more than anything, but it's also so helpful on tournament day, because rigging a tube when you break off, because you're throwing it in pretty hazardous areas, is so annoying, and it can totally derail a couple minutes of your tournament experience. And so when you have them pre-rigged, it's a super easy fix. It's just like retying any other bait. Instead of grabbing a new bait, sliding it in, pushing it through, retying it, and it just it saves casts every time we're out there, whether it's like 4 to 5 casts on a retie or a whole like 10 or 15 casts doing a full re-rig. It's it adds up by the end of the day, especially when we're going through a handful of tubes each day. So it's one thing we strongly recommend. We always pre-rig, especially if we know we're on a bite where we're going to rely on a tube. You bet that we've got at least 5 or 6 tubes ready to go for when we eventually break off in some of the nasty stuff. So there's a couple of other tricks that we hold pretty close to the vest, but I'm super excited to share with you guys, and it's how we rig and prep a tube. So I already mentioned the filling of the Mega Strike as we rig the tube, but one of the interesting things that you'll notice, especially with these Dry Creek tubes, fantastic tubes, just our absolute favorite, and they're loaded with salt, but a lot of the salt is actually not on the surface of the bait. As you can see, there's a little bit of trace amounts, but when you what we've found is that those tubes that you have, they're just absolutely beat to heck. You caught a bunch of fish on them. Those are the ones that have the salt just pouring out of them. You get more and more bites, and so we're convinced that you actually have to kind of rough up your tube a little bit before you go out there. So every time before we rig them, we get the tube on the deck and we just start rubbing it around on the carpet, trying to get as much of that salt out as possible. And then you can see now a ton of that salt has come to the surface, and it just creates a much rougher presentation that mirrors a lot more of what you expect with crawfish who've been in the water digging around the rocks. They're not a perfect sleek creature. They've got a bunch of imperfections to them, and we think that those imperfections and the added salt really go a long way with getting us more bites on tournament day. And then the last one, and this is one that we have won a lot of money on, and even won our first boat on it. It was it's a type of tube that we absolutely love and hold very, very close to the vest, but that is the drop shot tube. It's a little 2.5-inch tube. We love to use the Dry Creek ones. They're just super soft, really malleable. A ton of action in the water, but as you can see by our investment in these 100+ mini tubes, we use them a lot. And there's a ton of bodies of water where you get a ton of small crawfish or a ton of small bait fish that get all mixed up in these areas where you got these rock to grass transitions, and that bait just flat out gets bit when nothing else does. It twirls down like no tomorrow. It twists your line up, but it's totally worth it because you catch the crud out of them on it. It's a super good bait. A couple ways that you can rig it. You can rig it with you can actually use like a rebarb worm hook and just thread the whole bait through it. That's one way that we rig it if we're getting a lot of short strikes. But normally we just like to rig it with the same open-faced drop shot hook. Size 2 is what we typically use for it, and it's just a phenomenal presentation. Anytime we're around like a moving body of water, like a river, or in a like a heavily grass infested area, like where there's a lot of grass pods outside of rock, you can bet that we're throwing that as our go-to drop shot bait just about every time, because it's that small profile. Not a lot of guys are doing it, and they just can't stay off of it. Well, I hope this kind of helped you guys kind of build a little bit more confidence around the tube. Hope you guys learned something. We absolutely love doing these educational videos, and especially when it's things that we're super passionate about, like throwing tubes in the summer. That's some of our bread and butter. So I hope you guys like the video. Hit the subscribe button, smash the like button, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Tight Lions.